Live last 20 seconds. If you have 5 minutes before you move on with your day, give those 5 minutes to this, because what happened on American television on the night of March 15th, 2026 was one of the most extraordinary, most revealing, and most consequential diplomatic performances any world leader has delivered on a live broadcast in years. And almost nobody is talking about the full picture of what was actually said. So share this right now before you hear another word, because the information in this script connects dots that the mainstream news cycle simply does not have the time or the incentive to connect for you. Hit share, send this to your people, and then let us walk through every single word that Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said on CBS News's Face the Nation. Because embedded inside that interview are at least 5 bombshells that demand your full and undivided attention. Let us set the scene first, because context transforms everything. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a joint military campaign that struck over 5,000 targets across Iran in its first 16 days. The opening salvo killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. American B-2 bombers dropped GBU-57 bunker-busting bombs on Iran's hardened underground nuclear facilities. The U.S. Navy destroyed 17 Iranian warships. Israel struck Iranian military airfields, missile launch sites, and command infrastructure from the air and sea by any measure of conventional military force. It was one of the most devastating opening campaigns any nation had experienced since the Iraq War of 2003. And then on Sunday, March 15th, 2026, 16 days into that war, Iran's foreign minister sat down in front of a camera in Tehran, connected via Zoom to CBS News anchor Margaret Brennan in Washington, and gave an interview that raised eyebrows from the Pentagon to the Kremlin to every newsroom on the planet. Not because he said what diplomats in his position usually say, but because he said things that nobody expected, and because some of what he said, if true, changes the entire strategic picture of this war in ways that are deeply alarming for everyone. The first bombshell came within the very first minute of the interview. Margaret Brennan asked a simple and direct question. She asked whether Iran had asked for a ceasefire. In every modern conflict involving a nation under sustained aerial bombardment, that nation's foreign minister typically uses every available platform to advocate for de-escalation, to express a desire for negotiations, to appeal to international opinion by positioning their country as the party seeking peace while the aggressor continues bombing. That is the standard playbook. Araghchi threw the standard playbook directly into the trash. His answer was 4 sentences long, and each sentence landed like a stone. He said, "No, we never asked for a ceasefire. We have never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes." And then he went further. He said, Iran sees no reason whatsoever to talk with Americans. He cited the experience of the previous round of diplomacy when U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had met with him directly in Geneva just 48 hours before the bombs started falling. He said, and these are his exact words, "We were talking with them when they decided to attack us. And that was for the second time. There is no good experience talking with Americans." Stop for a moment and absorb the geopolitical weight of that statement. The foreign minister of the country being bombed, a country whose supreme leader was killed 16 days ago, whose nuclear facilities have been destroyed, whose navy has been sunk, whose air defenses have been gutted, sat on live American television and said his country has not asked for and does not want a ceasefire. He said Iran is prepared to keep fighting for as long as it takes. And he said there is no reason to negotiate with the United States. This directly contradicted the narrative that President Trump had been building publicly for days. Trump had posted on Truth Social that Iran is totally defeated and wants a deal, but that he has rejected their overtures because the terms are not good enough. He told NBC News that Iran wants to make a deal. Araghchi looked directly into the camera and said, "No, we do not. We never asked." And the contrast between Trump's framing and Araghchi's declaration produced an immediate and genuinely disorienting moment of public cognitive dissonance. One of these men is not telling the truth, and the answer to which one matters enormously for how this war ends. The second bombshell was about nuclear material, and it may be the most consequential statement any Iranian official has made in the entire history of their nuclear program's diplomatic saga. Margaret Brennan pressed Iraqi on the 440 kilon of uranium that Iran had enriched to 60% fissile purity. To understand why this number matters, you need to understand what 60% enriched uranium represents on the nuclear weapons spectrum. Weapons-grade uranium is enriched to 90% or above. At 60%, you are not at weapons grade, but you are considerably closer to weapons grade than the 20% level that the original JCPOA nuclear deal had capped Iran at. The Arms Control Association, one of the world's most respected non-proliferation research organizations, has noted that moving from 60% to 90% requires far less additional enrichment work than moving from 20% to 60% did. In other words, Iran's 440 kilos of 60% enriched uranium represented the single most sensitive piece of the nuclear negotiation puzzle. It was the crown jewel that American and Israeli negotiators most desperately wanted accounted for, safeguarded, and ideally removed from Iranian territory entirely. Before the war started, the entire diplomatic effort centered around this stockpile. Washington's demand was its removal. Arachi had personally offered, just 48 hours before the bombs fell, to downblend it to lower enrichment levels as a major concession to prove Iran was not building a weapon. And now, on live American television, Araghchi said the following. He said, "Our nuclear facilities were attacked and everything is under the rubble, everything under the rubble." He confirmed that the 440 kilos of 60% enriched uranium is now buried beneath the destroyed remnants of Iran's Isfahan nuclear site. He acknowledged that it could theoretically be retrieved under International Atomic Energy Agency supervision at some point in the future, but he said for the time being, Iran has no program and no plan to recover it. Margaret Brennan followed up directly and asked whether Iran was still willing to surrender that material. And Araghchi's answer was a masterclass in diplomatic ambiguity wrapped around a hard strategic reality. He said, "There is nothing on the table right now. Everything depends on the future. For the time being, nothing is on the table." Trump had previously told reporters he was considering sending ground troops to Iran specifically to secure that nuclear material. Now, the foreign minister was telling the world it is under rubble, that Iran has no current plan to retrieve it, and that it will only be discussed if and when Iran decides to negotiate, which Iran currently has no intention of doing. The nuclear material that was the central justification for the entire military campaign is now buried in rubble out of international monitoring and in the custody of no one. That is not a resolution of the proliferation risk. That is an intensification of it. The third bombshell was the claim that set diplomatic capitals buzzing and sent the UAE's government reaching for the sharpest words in its diplomatic vocabulary. Araghchi told CBS that Iran had recently received information indicating that the United States and Israel were launching attacks on Iranian territory from specific locations inside Arab countries. He named the UAE directly. He said U.S. forces had used Emirati soil, specifically near Ras al-Qaeda and locations near Dubai, to attack Iran using HIMARS artillery systems and other platforms. He cited the presence of American F-15 fighter jets operating from Kuwait, noting that 3 of them had apparently been shot down by what appeared to be friendly fire, and asking the pointed question, what were American F-15s doing in Kuwait if not being used to attack Iran? He said, "We cannot just remain silent on this." The response from the UAE was immediate and volcanic. Anwar Gargash, senior diplomatic advisor to the president of the UAE, did not simply deny the claim. He eviscerated it publicly and personally. He said Araghchi had condemned his own country, had entrenched its isolation, and had exposed its aggression while knowing full well that the UAE had exerted sincere efforts until the very last moment to mediate between Washington and throne to prevent this exact war. He said Iran had launched 1,099 attacks on the UAE since the war began. He said the UAE has the right of self-defense against what he called terrorist aggression. And he said Iran has abandoned wisdom, lost its compass, and misdirected its aim by making accusations against the very country that tried hardest to save it from this conflict. U.S. Central Command, for its part, offered no response to Araghchi's specific claims about Emirati territory. The official American military communication arm of the entire Middle East operation simply said it had no comment. A non-denial in diplomatic terms is not the same as a denial. And the silence from Washington, while the UAE burned with fury at Tehran's accusations, created a triangular diplomatic firestorm with no clear resolution in sight. The fourth bombshell was the one about Citibank. Between the weighty nuclear disclosures and the territorial accusations, Arakchi delivered a line that sounded almost casual, but was actually an extraordinary public confession of a deliberate strategy to target American financial infrastructure. He said Iran had struck Citibank offices in Manama, Bahrain, and in Dubai in the UAE as a direct retaliatory response to a U.S. airstrike that had destroyed an Iranian bank in Tehran. That Iranian bank, he specified, was the one used to pay Iranian security forces. So, the United States destroyed Iran's military payroll bank, and Iran responded by striking Citibank branches in two of the Gulf's most important financial centers. Think about the implications of that exchange for a moment. Iran is not simply firing missiles at military bases. It is deliberately targeting the financial architecture of the American presence in the Gulf. It is hitting the branded offices of one of the world's largest banks in the financial capitals of the region. It is saying explicitly that American financial institutions are legitimate military targets in this conflict. And it is doing so publicly on American television in an interview that will be watched by every investment bank, every insurance underwriter, every Fortune 500 company with regional operations, and every sovereign wealth fund in the Gulf. The message is not subtle. If you do business with America in this region, you are a target. This connects directly to Arakchi's fifth major claim of the evening, which was a broader and more expansive threat that has received far less coverage than it deserves. He stated that Iran would respond to any continued attacks on its own energy infrastructure by targeting American companies in the region or any companies in which the United States holds significant shares. He was not speaking abstractly. He was making a precise, named doctrine-level declaration. The U.S. struck Karg Island, which processes approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. Iran responded not just with more missiles, but with a formal declaration that American corporate equity is now a target set. This is not a marginal escalation. This is Iran telling every multinational corporation with Middle East operations, every joint venture with Gulf partners, every logistics company, every shipping insurer, and every energy company with regional contracts that the geography of this war now includes their assets, their offices, and their infrastructure. The interview also produced one of the more quietly damning exchanges of the evening, which has received almost no coverage because it is easier to dismiss as political theater than to sit with its actual implications. Margaret Brennan pointed out to Arakchi in a moment of sharp journalistic precision that he was speaking to her via Zoom on the internet, while the Iranian people had no open internet access at all. The Iranian government had shut down the internet for its own citizens, while its foreign minister used that same internet to appear on American primetime television. Arakchi's response was the following: "Because I am the voice of Iranians, and I have to defend their right. The internet is closed because of security reasons, because we are under attack. The gap between that answer and reality is enormous. The Iranian people cannot read Arakchi's statements. They cannot watch his interviews. They cannot access international reporting on the war. They are living inside a bombardment with no external information about what their own government is saying to the world about their behalf. And their government spokesperson told an American television audience that this is being done to protect them." Arakchi also addressed the 4 American citizens currently held at Evin Prison in Tehran. When asked whether they were safe, his answer was a sentence of extraordinary diplomatic menace. He said, "If the United States and Israel do not attack our prisons, I guess they are safe." That single conditional clause embedded inside a question about the welfare of American civilians held in Iranian custody was a warning dressed as a reassurance. It was Arakchi telling the United States that the safety of American citizens in Iranian detention is contingent on American military restraint. It was leverage expressed in the form of a benign-sounding hedge. And the American anchor and the American audience and the American government all heard it exactly the way it was intended to be heard. Stand back now and look at the full picture of what this interview actually was. It was not a plea for peace. It was not a request for understanding. It was not an attempt to de-escalate. It was Iran's most senior diplomat speaking from a country under active aerial bombardment. delivering a series of calculated, precise, and strategically designed messages to multiple audiences simultaneously. To the American public, the message was that Trump lied when he said Iran wants a deal and that this is a war of Trump's own choosing that is killing people for no strategic gain. To the global financial community, the message was that American corporate assets in the Gulf are now legitimate targets. To the UAE and Gulf states, the message was that their soil is being used to attack Iran and that Iran knows it and will act accordingly. To the non-proliferation community, the message was that the nuclear material everyone was so concerned about is now under rubble and out of international custody. And to Washington itself, the message was the starkest and simplest of all. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes. We see no reason to talk to you. Nothing is on the table, and we are not asking you to stop. The Arms Control Association, in a detailed analysis published days before this interview, concluded that the United States negotiators were ill-prepared for serious nuclear negotiations with Iran, noting that less than 48 hours before the bombs fell, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner sat with Iraqi in Geneva in a third round of Omani-mediated talks, and that Iranian foreign minister himself had described those talks as coming close to reaching a deal. The Omani foreign minister had publicly described the February 26th round as producing substantial progress toward a nuclear agreement and had announced a follow-up technical meeting for March 2nd. That meeting never happened. The bomb started instead. And what Aragchi was communicating to the world on March 15th through every answer he gave to Margaret Brennan was that Iran walked into those Geneva talks prepared to make real concessions, including offering to downblend its entire 60% enriched stockpile, and that the United States chose to bomb rather than deal. Whether you believe that characterization or not, the fact that it is being made publicly in English on the most watched Sunday morning news program in America, 16 days into a war with no end in sight and oil above $100 a barrel, is itself a strategic act of enormous consequence. The interview that raised eyebrows on March 15th was not just a collection of startling claims from a foreign minister whose country is being bombed. It was a message. It was a doctrine. It was Iran's most polished and experienced diplomat sitting in the rubble of a war and telling the world exactly what Iran wants the world to know, that it did not start this, that it will not stop until the attacks stop, that it offered a deal and was bombed instead, that its nuclear material is now unaccounted for, that American financial institutions are targets, that Gulf states are complicit, and that it will fight for as long as it takes. 5 bombshells in a single interview, and the full weight of every one of them is still reverberating through every embassy, every trading floor, every military command, and every government that has a stake in what happens next in the most consequential conflict the Middle East has seen in a generation. Share this. Send it to everyone you know, because the interview that CBS broadcast on March 15th, 2026 was one of the most important 30 minutes of television news of this entire conflict. And the people around you deserve to hear every word of what was actually said. Sonnet 4.6 extended Claude as AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check cited sources.